Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the second session on the Modern Trends module. Today we're going to be talking about secularism and its connection with Islam and the Muslim world. Of course, secularism is something we didn't actually formally cover in the London area, and it's something very important, not least because it's something which keeps coming up in discourses with Muslims and non-Muslims. When I had a discussion with Jordan Peterson, this kind of was brought up, and in fact, before I had my first discussion with him, it was one of his major criticisms of Islam. And this is something you'll find in the Western Academy. A lot of people will say, like, why Islam isn't secular is the reason why it's behind, for example. And this is one of the main arguments they use. In fact, they say that this is connected to issues to do with the Reformation. I've tried to enumerate the kind of arguments, the main arguments that are used about this. And they say the first kind of argument is Islam/Muslims need to modernize. And so really what they mean by modernize is to secularize, and that's one of the things one of the staple part of a modern world is the secular order. The second kind of argument is used that Islam or Muslims need to secularize, and they just say it like that. They need to do that. And the third one is Islam Muslims need to westernize. And they are less likely to put it in those terms because it has colonial connotations. But these are the three kinds of ways that it can be put across. Now, the word secular itself, etymologically, comes from the Latin root word meaning that which relates to the world, and is in opposition to the church. And it's the belief or ideological commitment to the separation of religion and this worldly affair. This is from Kenny. Secularization is the process, because secularism is the word, and secularization, according to Berger, is the process by which sectors of society and cultures are removed from the domination of religious institutions. Vernacularly, if you look at the dictionaries, secularism is really the separation between church and state. Now, already if you really think about this, which should strike you as one of the main things about the word secular, is that the definition itself, I should ask, what does the definition depend on? The word secular, what does the definition depend on? If I say secularism is separation between religion, religious institutions, or religion and the state, what does the definition of secularism ultimately depend on? The definition of? Yes.
It presupposes that there's already a distinction between those two things.
Okay, but what do we need to, if you didn't have this thing, you couldn't have secularism? Institutions. There you have it. Thank you very much. Okay, that's right. Without religion, there cannot be secularism. Think about this. It's quite ironic, actually, because secularism is separation between religion and institutions or government or whatever it may be. So you can't have secularism without religion. So it's not ironic that the thing you want to get rid of is the thing you need to form what you have. Think of that for a second. Then you have another issue here, which is that if we're saying secularism is a division between religion and the state or the institutions or whatever it may be, then now what do we need to know what the definition of is? Religion. What constitutes as religion? What doesn't constitute as religion? And this is an area of great controversy. Because if you look at the dictionary, obviously they're going to say all kinds of things about what religion is. A belief in a divine being and ritual acts or these kinds of things. This is dictionary definition. But when you look at closely, when you look at what sociologists have said, some sociologists have stated, I think Charles Taylor is one of them. Charles Taylor has stated that religion can include any transcendental idea. Even Durkheim, from what I remember once again, included ideologies into the mix. Many sociologists said you don't necessarily need a divine being or something like that for something to be a religion. That's why Buddhism is not really, some say it's a religion, some say it's not a religion, but depends on what kind of definition of religion you're using. I mean, not all Buddhists believe in God. Not all Hindus believe in God. We covered this when we talked about Hinduism. So we even discussed the fact that you can be an atheist Hindu. Some Hindus classify themselves as atheists. They say we don't believe in these gods. This is just like a myth for us, but it's part of our culture and whatever. So the point is what is religion? That is itself something which is open to discussion. But then if we say it's a transcendental idea, we have a real big problem here. Because if we say liberalism is a religion, if we actually state that liberalism is a religion, and most secular states are liberal democracies, then secularism is undermined. Do you see what's going on here? It's very problematic. So if you say no, religion must be those things which you have a divine, being worthy of worship, or something like that. So Buddhism is not a religion then. So can I have a Buddhist state? If I have a Buddhist state, am I endangering the secular ethic or not? If I have a Hindu state, am I endangering a secular ethic or not? But then if I'm allowed a Hindu state, why am I not allowed a Muslim one? Then, this thing has become very dangerous now. They don't even know where to start and where to end. And this is where the conversation should start. What are you defining as religion? And why should those things only be religion? Especially when there's a scholarly backing for all these other things to be called religion. And so these notions of modernization and secularization or westernization are all contingent on these notions. First we have to define what we mean by secularism, or we define what we mean by religion, and what is the separation. So any questions on this point so far? No, okay. We'll go to the next thing. A lot of people actually cite the verse in the Bible, and I'll read it to you, which is in Mark chapter 12, verse number 17. Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and give to God what belongs to God. And to be honest with you, this is taken out of context, because the context here is taxation. It's like, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. It doesn't necessarily mean that God's rights should overtake, or the Caesar's rights should overtake God's rights. This was not, if you look at the verses before and after, it's talking about give tax to your state, basically. It's not saying that, God's rights are undermined. And if you know about the biblical discussion, you'll know that James and Paul had I'm not sure if you guys are aware who James, who's James? Yeah, he's the brother of Jesus Christ. Yeah, according to the biblical discourse and stuff like that. Yeah, there's the book of James, and he had beef with Paul. He had big beef with him. And Paul basically was of the opinion that you don't have to follow the laws. And there was a big scandal with him. And if you look at the biblical discourse and the record and stuff, there's a big scandal between James and Paul because they're of circumcision and stuff like that. But basically, James was saying, you need to follow the law. You need to follow the Old Testament law. So he's very much, and if you look at the book of James and other parts of the Bible, it's saying that you cannot abandon the Old Testament law. Whereas Paul is saying, no, God died on the cross. Jesus died on the cross, and as a result of it, you don't need to follow all this now. You don't actually need to follow all of this stuff. The reason why I brought that to the table is because, in many ways, Paul was the first protagonist of the secular ethic. It wasn't Jesus. It was actually Paul himself, because he, in many ways, abolished the religious law, the relevance of the religious law. But if you look at the verse of give unto Caesar what is to Caesar and give unto God what is to God, that's not enough or veracious enough for us to conclude that the New Testament is secular. If you look at the writings of Paul, yes, he was more, if you like, he was less concerned with the laws. If you look at James, he's way more concerned with the law. Who was right, who was wrong, that's a discussion that James Dunn and others from the Christian scholars have written about, and that's a different discussion for another day. However, to cite this verse and to say that Christianity is therefore secular, I think is a weak argument, and we need to be aware of that. I mean, before I did my first thing with Peterson, he actually mentioned this as a quote-unquote miracle of Christianity. He doesn't know that this is the context. And then when I spoke to him, it might have gone under the radar, because he mentioned it like before, but I said it quickly. I don't think many people heard what I said. Give unto Caesar what is unto Caesar, and give unto God what's unto God, yeah? And I said to him, what if Caesar was Hitler? And he just brushed it off and didn't answer it. So, what if Caesar was Hitler? Because, on the one hand, if you say, well, give on to Caesar what is to Caesar, yeah? If Caesar is Hitler, then you have totalitarianism. Then you have Nazism. Then you have all the things you hate. You can't choose your Caesar. You can only give it to, you can give him taxes, give him what you want. So this idea of a perfect separation between church and state, and give on to Caesar what is, and using these verses in a tenuous way to try and make a point, I think is actually a very weak argument when you look at all the context behind it. Any questions on that? So Peter Berger, who's basically this person's a prominent sociologist, okay? He helped propound secularization theories in the 1960s. Believes that there is a trend of desecularization. He said now we're moving away from secularization to desecularization. And he even says that the assumption that we now live in a secular world is false. Now it's interesting when you look at the UK as an example, because the question is the UK secular? Is actually one for discussion. It's not one way, is the UK not secular or is it not secular? Because there are institutions which are religious, like the Church of England, for example, the Anglican Church. And that is it's intertwined with aspects of the government, the second chamber and whatever. I think they even have seats that are designated for the Church of England. You'd know, right? Is that correct? They have seats. I don't know how many of them there are. In the Lords, maybe 12 seats?
I can't remember the number, but there's definitely.
But they're designated for people from the church, right? Yeah. And so this is clearly an imposition. And then on the other hand, so we said the Church of England, you have schools which are Church of England schools now. They have a special privilege. Church of England pastors and priests, they have more privileges than almost any religious person from anywhere else, because they get these big houses, and these kind of accommodations. The Church of England owns so much land in this country. People think there's some kind of toothless thing, but they have money. These guys have a lot of money, I remember having a conversation when I was doing in Oxford, because a lot of them were training to be priests. I said, how much you get? And he was trying to play it down. He's like, no, 20, 30,000, 35,000. I said, so why would you be doing all of this? He said, because, we get a house and we get this and we get that. Then I said, okay, well, we don't get any of that. So clearly there are privileges that are afforded to Christian people that are not afforded to the rest of the religions. So the question is this country secular, or is this country still somewhat at least religious? To what extent is this country secular? It's not going to be, if this country is secular, it's not secular. So this country is certainly not like America. America is way more secular than this country. They don't have a church like that. And then the ceremonial role of the king now is he is the head of the Church of England, as well as being someone who has the power to form governments and all this kind of monarch, ceremonial monarch, and all this kind of things. So how do we reconcile the fact that the West is telling us to be secular when they themselves haven't expunged themselves of the secularism that they espouse? It's a bit of a contradiction, actually, and it's not just the UK. Many Western European countries are like this. Denmark has a monarchy, I think. Norway has a monarchy. Belgium has a monarchy. They have the same kinds of situations, despite the fact that, from a census data perspective, almost all these countries have a downhill trajectory when it comes to population of religious people. Like, in other words, now I believe the latest census is going to show that England has 40% Christians, which is a minority. I mean, they haven't released it yet. It's going to be in May 2023. But I believe it's going to show this, because based on British attitude surveys, that's the projected. So it's going to be for the first time ever since maybe the 5th century, 6th century, 5th to 6th century. Even before, what's his name? William the Conqueror. Because Christianity came to this country around the 5th century with missionaries and all this kind of. So how long is this? We're talking about before Islam. That is pretty significant. Islam was in the 7th century. So Christianity came to England, like it spread and stuff, around the 5th century, 6th century, which is about 150 years, 200 years before Islam. So that's 1,700 years. Something like this. 1,600 years, something like this. And for the first time until that time, there will be a minority Christian population in this country. Below 50% will be Christian. But then we still have all these Christian institutions. Muslims are likely to be around 10%, 8% maybe. So maybe in 20 years, 30 years, when Muslims and Christians are closer to being maybe 2020, are we going to still have Church of England? Why? Then you have some issues. Democratic reasoning comes into play now. And this is another thing, that secularism, and this is my second point I wanted to make to everyone here today. I think his name is Van Mills, yeah? Van Mills made this point, he's a scholar of politics or international relations and all this kind of things, yeah? And he's focused on philosophical issues. He said it's a mistake to think that the West, all of the values of the West are in unison with each other, there's all harmony. He says that there are issues relating to some of the values. Like, for example, secularism is one value. But let me just give you a very simple, this is very simple, but maybe you haven't thought about it yet. In America, tell me 2 or 3 religious issues, or issues which are heavily inspired by religion, which are very popular for the public to know. Abortion, what else?
Transgender surgeries. Transgender surgeries.
Transgender
Surgeries like the
SRS surgeries. I think that's it's not been put up for referendum, let's say. So things that necessarily, like something very clear, like recently there's been referendums about, and there's been change in law.
They're teaching the like Darwinism in schools and the
Okay,
science,
okay.
the creationist narrative.
That's okay, fine. Creationism and stuff. I don't know if there's been change in law, maybe state by state. I have to look at that. But once again, a state by state one, which is a very important one, to do with marriage. Gay marriage. Okay, so you have, now think of this, yeah? America is meant to be a secular state, correct? All right. Have there been referendums? Have the public been asked about abortion? Yes. Sometimes they said yes, and sometimes they say no. Sometimes the Supreme Court of Justice America, in a very famous court case called Roe versus Wade, would say pro-abortion things or anti-abortion things, depending on if there are conservatives in the Supreme Court of Justice, if there's more conservatives or not, or whatever, there's liberals there, whatever. Sometimes they'll vote against gay marriage, but now they've mostly voted for it. When they're doing all of these things, what's at tension? Where's the tension? The tension is between democracy and secularism. Because if you're saying to me, secularism is a separation between church and state, but yet democracy allows me to make decisions which are inspired by religion about issues which are politics or socially relevant to politics or whatever, then to what extent are you allowing religion to be part of the state and the government? Either secularism is incapable or is impotent, the secular ethic has failed, or the democratic ethic must fail. So you can't have a pure democracy and a pure secularism. What if you have a democracy and everyone says, I want this person to be in charge who's going to implement Islamic law fully in the land, cutting the hand and doing this and whatever. I had the conversation one time with Adam Dean, one of the guys from Quilliam Foundation, and I asked him this very question. It's online, Ayani. I said, what if? I gave him this what if, and he was buzzing. He didn't know what to say. He just didn't know what to say. I said, what if you have a country, 99% of people say we want cutting the hand. What are you going to say now? Are we going to remove their democratic legitimacy? Or are you going to remove the secular ethic? Or what are you going to do? Whatever you choose, you're preferring one set of morality over another. Because the idea is that the West presents itself as fully coherent. You have to copy us, but in order for you to copy us, we have to appear that we have one set of morality which you can copy. That's the problem here. And that's what Van Mills is saying, that there is no harmony here. There's no harmony between secularism and democracy and liberalism and these things together. And I'll give you another great example. And these are very important examples to remember, by the way. because they're very, very powerful in discussions with, especially with non-Muslims or people that are antithetical to Islam or detractors of it or something like that, or Muslims, especially in this country. In this country, once again, the UK, in the 1940s or 1930s and 40s, or mainly the 40s, there was the Second World War, yeah? And there was something called the coalition government. Now, a coalition government means what? Everyone comes together and they make a big government. It's a grand government, big government. In that coalition government, what was there a lack of? What wasn't there, I should say? What didn't they do?
Diversity.
No, but if there's a coalition government, what isn't there?
Democracy.
There isn't a majority, but why is there not a majority? Because there wasn't any elections. They didn't have elections. Can you imagine this? Now, why did they not have elections? Because, by the way, this is not even controversial. Like, it went over the term and there weren't elections, akhi. There's no democracy in the country. They say because of the security and national security and these kinds of things, we can't do elections when we're fighting the Germans. How we're gonna kill this one, but this battle and that battle of the Somme and this battle, and then do elections? They say no, we're not gonna do these things. So there's no election. Now what I'm saying is, so you've sacrificed democracy for safety. Now, is this right or is this wrong? So even national security can compel you to do away with one of your values. So this idea of we constantly need legitimacy, we constantly need a mandate. We hear it now. Even this new Rishi Sunak has become. He's pretending he has a mandate. He has no mandate. In reality, he as an individual has a limited, or if zero, almost zero. No one voted this guy. No one voted this guy, man. And yet he can stand there with his 5'5" diminished physical stature and talk in his 45 kilogram self and start talking about I'm the leader and I'm this. I didn't vote for this guy and I wouldn't vote for this guy. And the Liz Truss come out, same thing. This is nonsense. We want to see an election happen. Well, maybe, I don't care if there's an election or not, but at least from a democratic perspective, that's what they should be saying. And to be fair, that is what some of them are saying.
Maybe.
Huh?
Only the losers will maybe.
Yeah, no, but that's what I'm saying. These people are unelectable, actually. Like, the only two, with the exception of Margaret Thatcher, the only two times you've gotten a prime minister that's a woman is when they were forced into power with the, despite the electoral wish. And the only time you got a brown man in there when he was forced into power, and he's one of the richest person in Britain. What's the democracy in that? There's a diversity over democracy, for example. I mean, what's going on here, Yani? So the point is that these things that they espouse, we want a democracy and secularism. You can't have democracy. What I'm saying is, it's impossible to have an unfettered democracy and an unfettered secularism at the same time. That's my claim. And that's a simple enough claim. So I say, we want you to modernize and secularize. Say, does your vision of modernization include democracy? Yes, it does. So if your vision of modernization includes democracy, then you must understand that you cannot have an unfettered or unrestricted democracy and an unrestricted secularism. So which one should we choose? They say, no, let's have the secularism. So what, should we not have democracy then? Or let's have the democracy, should we not have the secularism then? And on what basis are you making this decision? Well, it's not be a democratic basis. Because I'm making a secular decision despite democracy using a democratic basis. Well, it would be a liberal basis. Now you have a third ideology. Because secularism and liberalism are two separate ideologies. They're different things. Like when I was doing my undergraduate degree, and there was a book that I read by Barbara Ross called Using Political Ideas. She had a separate chapter for democracy and a separate chapter for liberalism. They're two separate things, Yani. They're two separate things. We're talking about two different assumptions, different ideology, different thing. So if you have liberalism now, and liberalism is saying the harm principle, but then the democracy goes against the harm principle, it's either now the harm principle of this or that. There's so many contradictions. There are actually so many contradictions. And then when you bring in free speech and free expression, then you have the real problem. Because you got free speech absolutists. And they'll say, we want complete free speech so long as you're not inciting violence. That's what they say. Okay, say, what do you say about mocking the Holocaust? I'm not saying denying the Holocaust, because it's illegal to do that in Germany and many other countries. I'm saying, what do you say about mocking it? They'll say, well, we can mock the Holocaust, but this will offend and this will harm the people and this will do this and that. But no, we can't mock the Holocaust. Can you mock the Holocaust? Can you not mock the Holocaust? So everything here is arbitrary. And unfortunately, it goes back to the elites. And that's what we're seeing, a lot of the decisions being made on cancellation, on this, on that, whatever, based on who is at the top. Certain things can be said, certain things cannot be said. It's arbitrary. It is a facade, the veneer of, yeah, you guys are free, yani. Have you heard of the panopticon? Is it called the panopticon? Jeremy Bentham. It's basically this idea that it's a prison where you can see everybody in every cell because there's mirrors everywhere. You can see it here. So it's the criticism, the modern criticism of the Western world is that you are letting us do what we want, or at least think that we're doing what we want. You're letting us go here, there, but you're seeing exactly what we're doing. And we're in your prison. But as soon as we go outside the bounds, you're going to start dealing with us in a way which we don't know what you're going to do. And quite frankly, in many ways, honestly, a totalitarian system can be better than that. Because with a totalitarian system, if you're living under a dictatorship, you know where the boundaries are. If I do this guy's going to beat me up. The worst thing is, I don't know where the boundaries are. I don't know why this guy's going to kill me, put me in prison, when the drone is going to come, where there's going to be an extrajudicial killing. I don't know when it's going to be arbitrary, based on the strategic decision making of the elites. In many ways, that's a more trepidatious place to be, anxiety-ridden place to be, than a dictatorship. Because with a dictatorship, you know, if I say these words about this ruler, if I say these words about this particular ruler here, if I speak about politics, if I do this, they're going to kill me, or they're going to put me in prison and torture me. Okay, I know the rules. I get it. I understand it. It's very straightforward, actually. A dictator is only is very good making us know what he's good, what he wants. Very good at. But yeah, in the West, you go here, you go there. Your accounts are frozen. This morning, my account was frozen. I'm being serious, Akhi. This is not. Wallah, it's the second time I can't. Now, your account is frozen. This and that. You have to go to this. The police comes in. What? Every time you do this, you don't know why they're doing it. Even you don't know what you've done. And in many ways, that's a worrisome place to be. Maybe I've just gone abroad. Sorry. Now. Yeah, so it was Charles Taylor who said it's a transcendental system. And with that, it's a very short session. But with that, we will conclude. This is the first session on secularism. Any questions before we conclude on some of the stuff that we said today? All right, fantastic. Well, we'll see you guys later. We're going to be speaking about modern trends for the next 3 weeks, and then we'll move on to some shubuhat. This is the second, I think it's 4 weeks, sorry, I should say 4 weeks, because it'll be 6 weeks overall. This is the second session on the modern trends, and inshallah, we'll be seeing you next week. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.